8. Lucky Dragon 5. Built in 1947, the Japanese tuna fishing boat Daigu Fukuryu Maru, known in English as FV Lucky Dragon 5, took 5 ocean voyages throughout its short-lived career. In early 1954, it set out for the Midway Sea in the North Pacific and eventually headed toward the Marshall Islands. In the meantime, the American military prepared to detonate a hydrogen bomb at Bikini Atoll, near the Marshall Islands. Known as Operation Castle Bravo, the experiment predicted a 6-megaton yield. Based on this estimation, the U.S. Navy had established a danger zone and issued a notice in advance of the test. The Lucky Dragon 5 was outside the established danger zone when the bomb was dropped. It yielded a much bigger explosion than expected, releasing 15 megatons of energy into the environment. A few hours later, radioactive fallout rained down on the 23 fishermen aboard the vessel. They removed the material from the deck by the handful as they collected their gear from the water and navigated away from the area. Later that day, the crew members began to feel sick and vomit. Their gums bled, their eyes burned, and they suffered from headaches, dizziness, and diarrhea. Over the following week, they developed painful blisters, their skin began to darken, and their hair started falling out. The men received treatment for acute radiation sickness. 6 months later, radio man Aikichi Kobayama died from complications related to the poisoning. Many crew members faced lifelong health issues and died from cancer in their 50s and 60s. Their children have also suffered as a result of their father's exposure to nuclear fallout. To make matters worse, officials estimated that over 800 Japanese ships and boats were exposed to radiation from Castle Bravo. The U.S. government downplayed the incident and even accused the Lucky Dragon of being a spy vessel, before begrudgingly coughing up a meager $2 million in compensation to the Japanese government. 7. Katyn Massacre. The Nazis and the Soviet Union both invaded Poland in 1939. They divided the country into 2 spheres of influence, with the Germans taking control of Western Poland while the Soviets took the eastern region. Secret Soviet police forces rounded up thousands of Polish military members, took them into the Katyn forest outside of Smolensk, massacred them, and buried them in a mass grave. Word of the mass killing got out after Germany pushed its way into Western Poland in 1943 and discovered the burials. Representatives from Poland's exiled government, based in London, traveled to the site and concluded that the Soviets were responsible for the murders. Not wanting to disrupt diplomatic relations with the USSR, American and British officials pressured the Polish officials to keep quiet about their findings. As the Germans continued drawing attention to what they'd found, Joseph Stalin adamantly denied Soviet involvement in the killings and blamed the Nazis. The matter went unaddressed for more than 40 years, until Mikhail Gorbachev became the president of the Soviet Union. He implemented an unprecedented policy of openness regarding Soviet politics and history, including when it came to the secretive Stalin era. At the same time, the Soviet Union was losing its power over the satellite states, especially in Poland, where the growing solidarity movement proved detrimental to communist power. In 1990, Soviet officials finally acknowledged culpability for the massacre and formally apologized to Poland. The effects that it had are difficult to gauge, but the Soviet Union's willingness to finally take responsibility for some parts of its dark past symbolized a major turning point toward the end of the Cold War. 6. Iran Air Flight 655. While sailing near the Persian Gulf toward the end of the Iran-Iraq War in July of 1988, the U.S. Navy missile cruiser USS Von Sen got into a skirmish with a handful of much smaller Iranian patrol vessels. During the shootout, crew members aboard the Von Sen detected an approaching aircraft. After several failed attempts to establish contact with the pilots, the ship fired 2 missiles. One struck the plane, causing it to immediately break up in mid-flight and crash into the water below. The Americans had mistakenly shot down Iran Air Flight 655. a commercial aircraft filled with civilian travelers who were on their way from Tehran to Dubai. All 274 passengers and 16 crew members died. The incident sparked widespread outrage around the world, including in the U.S. In addition to killing hundreds of civilians, Captain William C. Rogers III had ignored warnings from Iranian authorities, as well as the U.S. command in Bahrain, to withdraw from Iranian waters. Then President Ronald Reagan apologized for the incident, but maintained that the Navy acted in self-defense. U.S. officials argued that the Von Sen crew had mistakenly identified the plane as an attacking jet fighter, and criticized the pilot for not responding to the Navy's attempts to establish contact. An investigation concluded that Flight 655's crew most likely thought the calls were for another aircraft nearby. The International Civil Aviation Organization concluded that American warships in the Persian Gulf lacked the technology to monitor civilian planes or communicate with air traffic controllers. The U.S. government eventually paid $131.8 million to the victims' families and issued statements regretting the loss of human lives, but never acknowledged any wrongdoing or formally apologized. Have you ever heard about this? Tell us in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. 5. The disappearance and death of Vanessa Guillen. In July of 2020, 20-year-old U.S. Army soldier Vanessa Guillen vanished from Fort Hood in Texas. Her dismembered remains were found along the nearby Leon River more than 2 months later. Shortly after the discovery, an enlisted soldier named David Robinson fled Fort Hood and took his own life. His girlfriend, Cecily Aguilar, faces charges relating to her alleged role in disposing of Guillen's remains. Shortly before she disappeared, Guillen told her family that a sergeant was harassing her. She started losing weight and appeared increasingly stressed and unhealthy, but told her loved ones that she could handle the problem. Other women had complained about the same sergeant, but their reports were overlooked. Vanessa decided against filing a formal complaint, perhaps out of fear or because she didn't think it would be taken seriously. After her remains were discovered, her family criticized the Army's handling of the investigation, which soon fell under widespread public scrutiny. They accused the military of a cover-up, and an independent civilian panel found numerous issues with how the investigation was carried out. Detectives failed to thoroughly investigate Robinson or to dig deeper into conflicting details they gathered during interviews. Sadly, the investigative shortcomings didn't start with Vanessa's case. A closer look revealed a troubling pattern of botched investigations, wasted resources, and fruitless pursuits within the department. In 2021, the Army announced plans to restructure its Criminal Investigation Division and improve its policies to prevent history from repeating itself. But skepticism lingers as people wait to see signs of actual change. 4. Gulf of Tonkin Incident. In 1964, the administration acting under then-President Lyndon B. Johnson announced that the American naval ship USS Maddox had been attacked twice by the North Vietnamese. Congress passed a resolution allowing the government to take any action deemed necessary to protect U.S. forces, and this was essentially the turning point that marked America's official entry into the Vietnam War. The decision was shrouded in mystery and suspicion, especially among the many members of the American public who opposed or questioned U.S. involvement in Vietnam. But the government stuck to its story until the early 2000s, when more than 200 documents concerning the Gulf of Tonkin incident were declassified. It quickly became clear that the second alleged attack on the Maddox, the one used to justify America's full-scale involvement in the war, never happened. A 2005 study by historian Robert Hanyok revealed that the evidence was carefully chosen to misconstrue the truth, and some claims were plain old untrue. While the government has not confirmed nor denied whether lies were used to pass the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, the declassified documents seem to speak for themselves. 3. My Lai Massacre. On March 16, 1968, U.S. troops in South Vietnam's Son Tin district massacred as many as 500 or more unarmed civilians in the rural village of My Lai. Before the horrifying event took place, commanders from the Army's Charlie Company, part of the American Division's 11th Brigade, received word that My Lai's neighboring village, Sun My, had been overtaken by Viet Cong guerrillas. At the time, the morale among American forces in Vietnam was deteriorating. Just 2 months earlier, the North Vietnamese had majorly escalated its war effort in a series of devastating attacks known as the Tet Offensive. After losing dozens of men to injuries and deaths, Charlie Company was down to just over 100 soldiers. Charlie Company was sent on a search and destroy mission with instructions from their superiors to consider anyone in the area to be VC or VC sympathizers. They were ordered to destroy the village. The soldiers rounded up the villagers into groups, searched their huts, and only found 3 weapons. But they went ahead and began killing them anyway, shooting men, women, pregnant women, children, and the elderly indiscriminately, and setting their huts on fire. Numerous women were assaulted before they were killed, and their livestock were also shot dead. The villagers didn't fire a single shot at the men, and almost none of them were military-aged men. While on a reconnaissance mission, Army helicopter pilot Hugh Thompson saw the carnage that was happening. He landed his aircraft between Charlie Company and fleeing villagers and commanded the soldiers to stop attacking or he would open fire. The U.S. Army investigated the massacre, but officials knew that if public found out about the atrocities at My Lai, it would have a damaging effect on their views of the Americans' already controversial presence in Vietnam. The incident was covered up until 1969, when Ron Riedenhauer, a soldier who had learned of the massacre, spoke with investigative journalist Seymour Hersh. In the meantime, Thompson, the helicopter pilot who had intervened to stop the massacre, claimed that he was alienated and even received death threats from fellow service members. Even after the story broke, the military strived to downplay what happened at My Lai. Only 14 people were ever charged, and they were all acquitted, except for Lieutenant William Calley, who ordered the murders. 2. The death of Pat Tillman. Pro football player Pat Tillman famously gave up his high-paying contract with the Arizona Cardinals to serve in the U.S. military following the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001. He became an Army Ranger, and in 2002, he began a 3-year tour of duty, first serving in Iraq and then Afghanistan. Tillman was shot dead in 2004. The military claimed that he was killed in an ambush after saving dozens of fellow soldiers from the attacking enemy, but it was later revealed that he died by friendly fire. Pat's mother, Danny Tillman, was one of the main catalysts in exposing the cover-up after realizing that certain details didn't add up. His father, Pat Tillman Sr., also helped to reveal the lies by challenging the Justice Department's vague explanations of the holes in their original story. At the Tillmans' urging, an inquiry was carried out. According to the official account, Tillman and a few others had become separated from their unit and were mistaken as guerrilla fighters by their fellow soldiers, who shot in their direction indiscriminately. In addition to the questionable paperwork, Tillman's uniform and other evidence from his death were never sent to the U.S. for review by a medical examiner, which is the customary protocol. His superiors also recommended him for the Silver Star Medal, which is not given to soldiers who die from friendly fire. In short, the military went out of its way to glorify Tillman's death, quite possibly to boost the public's perception of a controversial war that many disagreed with. It's probably fair to assume that the officials who spun this narrative didn't expect Tillman's parents to go out of their way to uncover the truth, which might still be buried if they hadn't. 1. Bismarck. For a short time, the German battleship Bismarck was Europe's most formidable seafaring vessel. At nearly 800 feet long, 244 meters. It was the German Navy's largest ship. It had a crew of more than 2,000 men and was armed with guns that were capable of shooting 1 ton, 0.9 metric tons, shells as far as 24 miles, 38.6 kilometers. In 1941, the newly built Bismarck was tasked with intercepting Allied cargo ships that were transporting supplies to Britain. During the first days of its maiden voyage, it sank the Royal Navy battlecruiser HMS Hood. The British were infuriated and aggressively pursued the Bismarck. They were looking for a fight, and that's what they found when they caught up with the Germans. Acting on orders from Prime Minister Winston Churchill to destroy the Bismarck, more than 50 British ships set out in search of the enemy vessel. They attacked it with full force and sent it plummeting 16,000 feet, 4,877 meters to the sea bottom. Oceanographer Robert Ballard located the Bismarck in 1989, nearly 50 years after it slipped beneath the waves. The wreck still bore the swastikas that had been painted on it shortly after its construction. Its condition was especially impressive, considering how it had landed on extinct volcano and had tumbled 2/3 of the way down its 3,300-foot, 1,000 meters slope. Thanks for watching. Which one of these military cover-ups shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button while you're at it.